Hi, this is Rebecca Rolfus. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Coastal Georgia. I gave this presentation at our annual meeting on May the 22nd this year, but I wanted to share it with a larger audience because I think you need to be informed, I think you need to know your rights, and I think you know why these are scary times for voters. You think this is going to be about the pandemic, and we'll get to that. But these were already scary times for voters everywhere, but especially in Georgia. And here's why. No state has done more than Georgia in recent years to make voting difficult, especially for minorities. In the Jim Crow days, African American voters were actively intimidated and prevented from voting. Today, the tactics are less violent and outrageous, but more insidious because they use a system itself and they do not target African Americans specifically. They protect the party in power, whichever one it is, and both are guilty of some of these things. And they disenfranchise the opposition. Instead of fire hoses and billy clubs, we have a labyrinth of rules and many invisible barriers, but what they amount to is voter suppression and intimidation. Voting is less personally dangerous, but the electoral system is scarier. Here's a few examples. In 2015, 6 million Social Security numbers and personal information of Georgia voters were accidentally shared with political groups and the media. This was blamed on a clerical error. In 2016, the Department of Homeland Security offered election and cybersecurity help to the state, but that was refused because it was seen as too much federal intervention in state politics. In 2017, Russian hackers targeted voting in 21 states. The basic integrity and privacy of the system is undermined. So the first question is my vote safe? And by extension, am I safe? Supposedly to protect us and our vote, and after the Supreme Court struck down parts of the Voting Rights Act, Georgia put these measures in place. Georgia is the only state that either has used or is using all 7 of these tactics. Proof of citizenship to vote was never implemented, however. Obviously, these tactics make it harder to vote, but it's highly debatable that they protect the security and integrity of the vote. Taken together, they actively discourage you from voting. If there is any problem with your state ID or your citizenship, or, in the case of purges, if you could be investigated for voting while dead, you are also afraid to vote, even though you may be legally registered and eligible. That brings us to purges. 44 states routinely flag inactive voters, but Georgia is one of only 9 that purges them based on use it or lose it legislation. In 2017, if you had not voted in 7 years, you were purged from the rolls. Then Secretary of State Brian Kemp purged over 500,000 voters based on inactivity, the largest single purge in U.S. history. Over the course of the next several months and before the election, successive purges happened. In a leaked audio obtained by Rolling Stone, then candidate Brian Kemp told donors that his opponents' turnout efforts, quote, concern us, especially if everybody uses and exercises their right to vote. This man is a former poll worker and had voted in the 2016 election. The only way he found out he'd been purged was that he renewed his driver's license. Of those purged, 56,000 re-registered within the same county, more than half of those at the same address. They had not moved out of state, they had not died, they had simply decided to sit out an election or two. 43% of those purged were people of color, even though they make up only 37% of state population. Voter registration does not come with an expiration date. As this man said, if you don't drive your car for 7 years, you don't lose your license. As we all recall, there was a hue and cry following the purges, and these measures were put in place. Use it or lose it was extended from 7 to 9 years, and since we renew our driver's licenses every 10 years, anyone purged should be automatically re-registered when they do that. No polling place can be closed within 60 days of an election. No absentee ballot can be rejected due to exact match. But the damage was done. The election was over. The total votes added up to victory for one candidate, but no one knows how many people didn't vote because of the obstacles thrown in their way. Another example, this one very close to home. Some voters stood in line for 4 hours in Pooler. In response, the Board of Elections acquired more voting machines, hired more poll workers, and designated 2 new polling places. However, the City Council tabled the issue for 2 months, said that it needed more information. Then they procrastinated for another month, and then they said that there wasn't enough time to notify voters of the changes before the midterm election. We found all this out through the activities of our Observer Corps. Pooler got no additional resources, and the Pooler city attorney threatened to sue the league over an op-ed I wrote accusing them of voter suppression. Another scare tactic, yell fire, even when there is no smoke. The Secretary of State's task force on voter fraud is an example. If all you read is the headline saying that we have a new task force on absentee ballot fraud, especially in a year when a record number of people have requested an absentee ballot, and a headline is all most people will read, your immediate thought is, if we need a task force, something must be going on. In reality, nothing is going on. In the last 20 years, there are only about 20 proven cases of voter fraud in absentee ballots nationwide. All of them are small. The makeup of the task force is a problem as well. There are 8 prosecutors and 2 election monitors. Why not the other way around? The weighting toward prosecutors gives the whole thing a very litigious feel. We found out just this week that after 40 years, the Republican National Committee will engage in aggressive, quote, ballot security measures. They have allocated $20 million and will hire 50,000 poll watchers in 15 states to question voters they feel are ineligible. There is no evidence of voter fraud in those states, and coincidentally, they are states that the party might lose. The Georgia Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Commission, the organization that is in charge of the ethics of our elections, is investigating and issuing subpoenas, often to political opponents, without publicly showing evidence that there was any wrongdoing by those parties. To date, none of the investigations, subpoenas, arrests, or prosecutions against political opponents and minority get-out-the-vote organizations have led to convictions. Yelling fire is scary. It undermines our trust in the system. In these examples, because it is officially sanctioned, it adds to polarization and demonizes the other side. This brings us to conflict of interest. The Campaign Ethics Commission I just mentioned, like those in many other states, is charged with policing the same government officials who control their members, their funding, and their regulatory power. Redistricting and gerrymandering are the ultimate conflict of interest. Under current redistricting process, politicians get to choose who votes for them. If you are not likely to vote for them, they can draw a line that excludes you from their district regardless of whether it makes geographic or like community-minded sense. Redistricting will happen following the 2020 census, but in Georgia, the process happens largely behind closed doors. The third-party consulting company retained by the state uses proprietary algorithms to decide where to put district lines, and so will not share their rationale. Georgia also does a mid-cycle redrawing that, for instance, in 2015, swapped out heavily Black and Latino neighborhoods for white ones in the Atlanta suburbs. In the last redistricting, Georgia gained a congressional seat due to population growth. African Americans accounted for most of that growth, and African Americans tend to vote Democratic. Before the redistricting, Republicans held 7 of 13 seats. After redistricting, they hold 10 of 14 seats. And then we add the pandemic. All of the measures I've just described are designed to scare us away from voting, to undermine our trust in the system, and in some cases, both parties are guilty of them. With COVID-19, we have the ultimate nonpartisan issue. It is literally life-threatening to go to the polls. Almost 2 million Georgia voters have requested absentee ballots because they are afraid to go to the polls in June and next November. We give the Secretary of State a lot of credit for getting in front of this, for moving the election date, for sending every voter an absentee ballot request. Yes, there was confusion and mistakes were made, but our hope is that voters will like the option to cast their ballots by mail, and it will become more than a pandemic-induced one-time phenomenon. All of these, purges, hacking, suppression, intimidation, gerrymandering, not to mention the things I haven't talked about, like campaign finance reform, the Electoral College, the fact that a judge has been appointed to the state Supreme Court to fill out a vacant term and under Georgia law will now become permanent without the voters ever getting to voice their opinion. All of these are ways that elected officials choose us instead of us getting to choose them. They choose who gets to vote, and therefore, in many cases, they choose who gets to win. When our right to vote is endangered, our democracy is in danger. That's the truly scary fact. My goal is not to frighten you. My goal is to motivate you to make this happen. This is the vision statement of the League of Women Voters. Our job, your job, is to overcome scary times, to ensure that people want to vote, are confident that their vote will count, that they have the information they need, and most importantly, the right to cast a ballot. It is our job to advocate for reforms that make the system work as it was meant to. In addition to the important legal challenges that the League and other Get Out the Vote organizations join in, one of the best ways to counteract well-funded campaigns of suppression and intimidation and publicly sanctioned scare tactics is public attention and outrage. Don't be scared and don't be intimidated. Be outraged and be public about it. Join us in our efforts to overcome the fear, overcome the tools being used to keep us from joining. Join our Observer Corps so we can hold our Board of Elections and our boards of registrars accountable. Work on voter registration, on programs and forums, on communications to make sure voters know what's going on and why it matters. Join one of our postcard writing parties to advocate for an independent commission to oversee redistricting, or host one of your own. We'll even show you how. Join our text banking to alert purged voters so they can re-register and to get out the vote. Help us encourage vote by mail so that our votes are private, secure, and not subject to hacking. Help us expose alarmist tactics and conflicts of interest. Help the League empower voters and defend democracy. I thank you for your support and for your energy. This is important work, and we cannot do it without you. If you would like to contact us, please visit our website at lwvcga.org or send us an email and get involved. Thank you very much.